Welcome to the Arizona Sunset Podcast. Our goal is to seek senior solutions for aging problems. Now your host, Justin Owens.
On today's episode of the Arizona Sunset Podcast, we are talking with Charlotte Johnson, attorney with Davis Miles Law Firm in Tempe, Arizona. Charlotte is on the board for the Arizona chapter of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys and the Education Committee for the Southwest Autism Research and Resource Center, as well as the Executive Committee for Elder Law, Mental Health, and Special Needs Planning section of the State Bar of Arizona. Have practicing law since 2006. Charlotte, thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Charlotte, how did you get into senior care law?
Well, I started off as an attorney in commercial litigation. This is right around the time when the bubble was bursting. I started off as an attorney in 2006. That was right at the height of the economy. 2008 hit, and my heart just wasn't in it. Some of the attorneys that I worked with at the time wanted me to get involved in elder law, and that was around 2008, and it just was a good fit for me, turning from a litigator and a fighter to just helping families out and figuring out what's the best solution for their loved ones. It's been something I've enjoyed ever since.
So since 2008, so you're going on 11 years now in elder care and senior issues. It sounds like you kind of fell into it, but why have you stayed with it? Why do you continue to be a resource and help families? Why do you continue to find mentors and educate yourself on all these issues? We're going to go through a lot of things, and you prepared a well thought out outline. What is it that keeps you here?
Well, I've talked to a number of people over the years who, similar to me, were interested in getting into the elder care industry. They think that, well, here's an area that there's an abundance of business here in Arizona, lots of retirees, but your heart really has to be in it. And I think that's what's kept me there, is just kind of my nurturing nature. Makes me want to be able to reach out to families and help. So I think that's what's kept me in the business for as long as it has.
What do people ask you most often?
I'd say the typical clients that I meet with is either a spouse or an adult child of someone who's either currently needs care or it's on the horizon. Typically, someone else has told them that they need to meet with an elder law attorney and they've never thought of it before. So a lot of the people who walk into my office don't know what to ask. So I will try to fill in those blanks for them. And usually it's about how do we assist our loved one, act on their behalf, and then how do we afford this care. And I think that's the focus of this podcast, and it's probably the majority of what I hear, is how are we ever going to be able to pay for this when assisted living can cost upwards of $6,000 or $7,000 a month? How do they begin to cover that? And even people who are fairly well, feel that they're fairly well established, can live within their means, at that point can see that their money will run out. And so that's probably the most common issue that I cover, and even if they aren't thinking about it, I bring it up. I believe that's going to be the focus of this next period of discussion, and maybe I'll just kind of dive into that.
Sure.
So we'll cover the different ways that they can pay for their care. For those who are high net worth, they can privately pay, or in other words, pay out of pocket. Maybe they are one of the few fortunate people who've invested in long-term care insurance, but there are not many of those people. There's also a Veterans Aid and Attendance pension available to those who served active duty during a period of war. There's the all-tax benefit, which I'll get into more detail about. And then finally, Medicare may offer a very limited amount of assistance in the home, paying towards someone's long-term care, but it's very limited, if at all. So I hear that one a lot. People will say, well, I have Medicare, and that's not the answer.
Sometimes it can help, but it's not going to be the full-time, 24/7 type care that...
No, I mean, a doctor has to diagnose them as being homebound if Medicare is going to help them at all, and even then, it's only going to be a 2 or 3 times a week, if it at all.
Right.
So, and that's only going to last a few weeks, maybe. So
that's not a long-term benefit then?
No, it's not.
Oh, okay.
No, it's not. Or often when a person is in a hospital, they had a fall or a stroke or something like that and wind up in the hospital, they are discharged to a rehabilitation facility. But that's temporary as well, and that's covered by Medicare. But that's, again, very temporary. There's the hospice benefit that may be ongoing if a doctor determines that their life is likely to end within the next 6 months. But again, that's intermittent and depends on what the doctor has to say. But hospice can be very helpful when used in conjunction with other care assistance. So you may run into that in your care facility that you're running. You may use hospice.
We do have people on hospice. Yeah.
Okay,
Uh-huh.
and it does help. As far as meeting somebody's needs, it's covered by Medicare, so that's a huge relief.
Yeah.
But it's not the full solution for how they afford their care. So, well, let me touch on the veterans benefit for a minute. Veterans, they must be a veteran of war. So that's one of the things that we'll look at is when they were active duty. And what it is the Veterans Aid and Attendance it's a cash reimbursement for their out-of-pocket medical and care expenses. So they will actually receive a check in the mail for a certain limited amount. And what they look at is, are they of limited net worth? As of last October, they came up with some new regulations on that didn't exist before. It was very nebulous before then. But as of October, they have come up with a bright line amount, and it's about $127,000 that a person can have, a veteran or their surviving spouse can have and still receive this pension benefit. That $127,000 doesn't include their house, and it doesn't include one car, burial arrangements, if they've prepaid those. But otherwise, the other assets that they have, life insurance, annuities, and so forth, that counts towards that total. They also have what's called a 3-year look back. That's new as of October. So what the VA wants to know is, prior to their application, within the 3 years prior to their application, had they given away assets in order to spend down to that $127,000 limit?
Are they looking for anything like Christmas gifts to their children, grandchildren kind of thing?
Generally, they'll look at have the monthly benefit. So for a married veteran, they're going to get it's roughly $2,200. Did they give $2,200 away in any given month within the last 3 years? For a single veteran, it's $1,881. Have they given away that much with any given month within the past 3 years, and so forth? So, and what they're going to do with that 3-year look back is, if you've given away that amount, that's 1 month that they're going to delay the coverage. So if I gave away, say, $24,000 and I'm a married veteran, that's going to be, what would that be, roughly a year that I'll delay getting that coverage, not coverage, those payments. So that's kind of how they look at that, and it's a similar concept when we get into the All-Tex or the Medicaid benefit as far as how they calculate the delay in coverage. So
on that these are the limit amounts, but it's reimbursable, right? So they're reimbursed up to the $2,200, the $1,881.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So
it's not a check every month.
Yes, it is.
Oh.
It is a check every month. So to give you an example, let's say that I have less than $127,000 and I qualify. I'm paying. Let's say that I'm paying $3,000 out to a group home. I'm living in an assisted living group home, and I'm paying them $3,000 a month. I'm also paying for my health insurance premiums. I have a supplement, maybe. I have prescriptions that I pay for every month, and maybe there are. I'm wearing incontinence care, which can be pretty expensive. All of those will add up, and what they do is they look at my income, deduct those out-of-pocket expenses from that, and if that's a net zero or less in the red, then they're going to reimburse me that full amount. So for a surviving spouse, for example, a surviving spouse is going to get about $1,200 a month paid back to her every month. So that amount will land in her bank account.
Okay.
Yeah. So, which leads to the next issue is, this is the question I always have with the VA, is that enough? Is $1,200 a month reimbursement, is that enough? If a person is living in a assisted living facility that costs $6,000 a month, they're still going to burn through their savings. And so we always have to think with VA helps. It helps stretch out a person's savings, what remains. But it may not be enough on its own. So we always have to default to the All-Tex or the Medicaid program. It's always on our radar for most individuals.
So are veterans who qualify for the benefit and they're under the limits for the VA and assumably under the All-Tex limit, they could potentially be getting support or payments from both?
Yes.
Okay.
They can potentially get both. In fact, All-Tex requires that a person apply for the VA. It's part of the application process. Okay. Is to prove that you applied. Even if we know that there is a problem with the VA, we know that a person won't qualify, they make us show that proof. Now, if a person's service dates don't fall within the periods of war that the VA has designated, then we don't have to. But otherwise, we do. So maybe I'll jump into the All-Tex benefit this time.
Okay.
The All-Tex is an acronym. It stands for Arizona Long-Term Care System. And it's an interesting benefit because unlike the VA where it's cash, it's a cash reimbursement that gets deposited in a person's account every month, All-Tex is an insurance. So you don't actually see that money. They're simply paying the providers directly. I'll give an example of what makes All-Tex so, it can be a very enticing benefit. A lot of people may not be aware that if they are eligible for the All-Tex program, they could receive 40 hours of free in-home care and medical coverage at no cost to them. So if a person is under their limits, under the income limit, under the asset limit, that could be huge. To a person who wants to remain independent longer at home, that could be amazing. Now, maybe 40 hours is not enough. Maybe home just isn't safe for them. But it can be a nice transition for them.
You said 40 hours of in-home care, plus was there one other thing that you mentioned?
Medical coverage. So that's another piece of what...
For office visits, co-pays, that sort of thing. Right.
So all of their medical expenses go away. That's one huge bonus of the All-Tex coverage is they will cover all of the medical expenses, prescriptions, co-pays, co-insurance. That all goes away, depending on what insurance they select. Okay. They have the option of keeping their private insurance, and if so, then they pay less for their care in order to cover those expenses. The VA, just another comparison, with the veterans benefit, it'll reimburse their costs wherever they may be, at home, any care facility, any out-of-pocket medical or care expense. Whereas with the All-Tex benefit, the services they cover have to be contracted with them. So if a person moves into a care facility and expects All-Tex to cover it, they need to be an All-Tex contracted care facility.
Meaning approved by All-Tex or having gone through paperwork to become certified All-Tex.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So that needs to be part of the discussion when a person is discharged from a hospital or a rehab facility, or maybe they're at home and they're expecting that in the near future. It's very difficult to move a person who is suffering from Alzheimer's or a stroke, whose health is delicate. So we want to find a place that will meet their needs and that they don't have to move around. All-Tex, again, needs to be on that radar. If maybe they are not on All-Tex at this time, but they may be perhaps within a year or two in the future. And so for that person, I would suggest that they find a care facility or hire caregivers that already contract with All-Tex. So they're building that rapport, that relationship, and they don't have to start over again once they do apply.
So All-Tex is for Arizona. Do other states have their own system, I assume?
Yeah, every state is a little bit different. So every time a person moves here from another state or moves to another state, they have to start over again and meet that state's eligibility criteria.
Well, as far as the, I guess, social welfare net for seniors or those who need long-term care, it fell upon the states, not the federal government, to provide that. Is that true? Or
sort of. Okay. So every state receives what's called Medicaid funds. This is a Medicaid program under certain conditions. So if a state wants to receive federal funds, they must adopt those federal rules and regulations, and then the state will add their own funds on top of it. So that is true for Arizona. They're what's called a Medicaid waiver state, where they agree to cover more than just a skilled nursing home, but care in the home, assisted living, memory care, respite, all of those things fall under the All-Tex coverage, All-Tex being just one of the many Medicaid programs. But yeah, so in answer to your question, it's both federal and state, and the state is where it gets a little bit different because the state will put their own regulations on top of it.
Okay.
Most of these individuals who qualify for this benefit, however, aren't moving around very much, or they shouldn't be. Mm-hmm. So it's not too common that a person is moving from Arizona to another state or vice versa. Because by the time they meet the medical eligibility criteria, meaning they can't live independently, they need the assistance of another, they should not be moving around very often. It's very stressful and difficult for them. So it's not an issue that I see all too often.
Is that like not a diagnosis, but does the state require a doctor's order saying that this person cannot live independently, and that's basically what they need? It's not like a diagnosis, right?
No. For All-Tex, they do their own assessment.
Oh, okay.
They will send a social worker who works for their program out to meet with the person face to face, and it's subjective. So that's something that I definitely talk to my clients about a lot. I've had amputees denied. I've had people who are bedridden denied. And so you really have to, usually those situations, I think that the people are not prepared. They will ask the patient what they're able to do and what they're not able to do as far as their activities of daily living, getting dressed, showering, eating, that sort of thing. And it's either they are not aware of their lack of that ability, or it's just a tough pill to swallow. And so I never recommend that they leave it to the patient to handle that appointment, that medical assessment on their own, that other caregivers be present and explain the situation.
So they're allowed to give input and be there.
Yeah. Now, a lot of times, just to be more tactful, it can be agitating or depressing to a person to hear someone else correct them about what their abilities are and aren't. So I often will recommend that those caregivers, those family members who want to contribute to that assessment, that they do so maybe out of earshot or a separate phone call. So
the social worker would allow for those conversations to happen?
Oh, okay. Yes. They're
That's
very
good.
Aware that the person they're speaking with may not be giving them the full story.
Good.
But they're not always terribly motivated to track down family members or caregivers. And so the family, the caregivers, need to be proactive as far as providing that information to the assessor. They only know what you tell them, and so if all they know is that he's fine, then they're going to write down on their paper that he's fine. So, anyway, all right, I hope that explains a little more clearly what that means as far as the medical eligibility. The other thing is they'll want to know that the person has applied for any other benefits that they may qualify for. So perhaps that's a disability benefits if they're young enough. A person may qualify for Social Security disability, long-term disability if it resulted from something, workers' comp if that resulted from an accident at work. So any other benefit that they may possibly be entitled to, they need to prove that they've applied for that, and it either they're receiving it or it doesn't. They don't qualify.
So Altex isn't just for seniors necessarily; it's for people needing long-term care, which generally is seniors, but it can include people of any age who need that assistance. Okay.
Yes. For example, the DDD population, the Department of Developmental Disability, a person born with epilepsy, autism, cognitive impairment, or what's the other one? Cerebral palsy, is part of that DDD population. And what a lot of people don't realize is that Altex is paying for those services. Without Altex, it's just recommendations. It's case management, and that's all it is. So it's very important for that population to also qualify. But it's a different ways that a person can become eligible under that program. That's a whole nother hour.
Sure.
But all right. Good questions, though. Maybe I'll dive into the financial eligibility for a minute.
Okay.
They're looking at two aspects of financial eligibility primarily, and that's a person's income and their assets, or they use the word resources. Income is an issue that I'm typically not concerned about, because if they are over the income limits, they can always put an income-only trust in place. And what that is, it's a special bank account that the income that goes through that account, not all of it is counted towards that limit. And so in 99% of the cases, they can still qualify. So usually if someone says that their income is too high, it's something that's fixable. This year, the income limit is $2,313 per month gross income. Or they'll look at a couple combined, and if it's double that, 4,646, then a married person can still qualify.
What was that number again?
4,626.
It's double. Okay.
Yes, just double what an individual is. So as long as they meet one of those criteria, they'll qualify. And if they don't, we can use that income-only trust. That's not an issue. If someone comes to me and says, well, they were denied because they were over income, we know that's something that can be fixed. The other issue are assets or resources. Now, it's a Medicaid program, which is typically intended for the impoverished. For a unmarried applicant, they have to have less than $2,000, not counting their house, a car, their household goods, and burial arrangements if they've prepaid those. So, basically it's for someone who's pretty much out of money. Now, we hope to catch people before they're out of money so that they have more options. But often what the case is they will simply spend out until some helpful person out there in the elder care industry recommends that they talk or they look at Altex, because perhaps that person wants to continue to get paid, that elder care, whether it's caregivers in their home or a care facility. Hopefully, again, we catch them before they're out of money. Altex does not go backwards in pay. They only go forwards when a person may apply, a couple months may go by, and they are not covered until they're actually approved. So what do they do in the meantime? Either those care providers are eating those costs, or we catch them before, and maybe they're prepaying a little bit. Maybe there are some other ways we can go about it. There may be some exceptions that apply to them. The other aspect of that is for a married couple. Now, this is one area where I find a lot of misconception. A married couple does not have to be completely impoverished in order to qualify. What they do is they'll add up what both spouses have and split it in half. They will tell the other spouse who lives at home, they'll say, all right, you may keep half of what you have. The other half needs to be spent down to $2,000. Now, that half that community spouse can keep is going to be at least, it's about $25,000. So they're going to keep at least that much of their savings, or up to, it's about $126,000 total. But what I do as an elder law attorney is look at applicants like this, especially the married couples, and what Altex won't tell them, because they're not known to give out advice. Their job is to just tell a person if you're eligible or not. They're not going to tell that couple that maybe they don't have to spend down anything at all if they did some planning. So that's where I come in. I kind of look at myself as, for example, if I wanted to save taxes, I'm probably not going to call the IRS and ask them how I save taxes. So I consider myself kind of like an accountant for the Altex benefit. If a person wants to know how to preserve their savings, I don't recommend they call up Altex and ask them that question, because they're not going to be terribly helpful. But just like a CPA or an accountant is helpful with the taxes, an elder law attorney can be helpful as far as Altex is concerned, how a person can preserve their wealth, particularly the married couples, because there are many options available there. There are also fewer options, but they exist for an unmarried applicant. So it's definitely worth their time, I think, to communicate with an elder law attorney. My firm here offers free screenings, and we can help a person know if they're eligible now, or if there are options where we could possibly help them with asset preservation or any issues that may delay their approval. We want that ongoing coverage. We want them to preserve as much as they can and have ongoing coverage, so they're not there's no break in services, so they're not left out on their own. So some care providers will stop offering services if you can't pay them what they're owed. That they may get their eviction notice, and that's very difficult. We want to catch those people before and try to have continuous care for that person.
You mentioned, as far as the income goes, you can use the income-only trust, and I assume that income consists of like pension payments, or not. I wouldn't assume. I would assume not like big, like not rental income from like say real estate or I don't know, dividends from a large stock account, because that would go with the assets as well, right? But is there annuities? I don't know what else would be coming in as income, or Social Security, that sort of thing.
That about covers it pretty much. I mean, if a person has dividends coming in, it's because they own stock, and they're not going to own stock if they're applying.
Qualify.
Right. Yeah. So either they're going to cash in those stocks, we may be transferring it to a spouse or to other family members, depending on whether they meet any exemptions. And the same is true for, annuities. That depends on how they have it set up. But yeah, I mean, there may be other sources, but most often it's Social Security plus some pensions on top of that.
Okay.
And what a lot of people don't often realize is that pensions will withhold money, taxes, dues, health insurance, things like that. Even Social Security does that. One of the nice aspects about All-Tex is that they will pay Medicare. So a person who is on the All-Tex benefit, their Social Security income goes up when they go on to All-Tex, because All-Tex is paying Medicare directly instead of Social Security withholding it from their check.
Is that something that's automatic once
Yes.
it's approved? Okay.
Yep, it's automatic. It happens without anyone flipping any switch or contacting anyone. It
That's
just
surprising
happens.
since it's government.
Yeah. Yes.
As far as for a married couple, you said the spouse not needing All-Tex would be able to keep at least $25,000, and $126,000 was the upper limit of that. And you said there's exemptions that perhaps they could protect more of the resources to qualify the needing spouse for All-Tex.
Right. There are a lot of exceptions with a lot of particular requirements, and if you don't meet those requirements exactly, then you can't do that. But a lot of times what we end up doing is shifting all of the assets over to that community spouse, and then the half that they're required to spend down, whatever that is, putting it in, either actually spending it on something they need to pay for, like burial or a mortgage or debt they may have. Maybe
not a Maserati or something like
that.
No,
well, I mean, if they want, I suppose that they're allowed to own.
They keep one car, right?
One car. If that husband can get in and out of that Maserati, go for it. But it's doubtful. They shift assets over to the community spouse, and then what they have to spend down will put into something that doesn't count. Maybe they're paying down their mortgage. Maybe they are doing repairs to their home that they need to do anyway. They've just been putting it off, things that they've needed. We may also invest in a Medicaid compliant annuity, and I usually don't go into a whole lot of detail about that because there's a lot of risk with that. I don't recommend that a person go out and call up your Charles Schwab or your Fidelity and say, hey, I need a Medicaid annuity. The rules are very particular and they're different in every state. So when you call an 800 number, I don't suggest that. If it's done incorrectly, they will penalize. All-Tex will penalize. So I strongly suggest that they talk to an elder law attorney before they go out and do that first. There are a lot of steps that have to happen before you get to that point.
Can I ask a question about, you mentioned paying down the mortgage on the house as some of that, and I remember you had posted an article, I don't know if it was several months ago or maybe even the fall of last year, about will All-Tex take my house if I qualify for All-Tex? Or I guess more importantly would be for the surviving spouse. Would they be able to do that if there's a spouse, or is the house
That's
untouched?
A good question. So that's what they call estate recovery. So when a person is on All-Tex and they pass away, that's when the state has the right to collect back what they've paid out towards that person's care. But a person has to be over age 55 in order for them to do that. They have to be unmarried.
Okay.
And if there is a child who is on disability, they're not going to collect. Or they have minor children, they're not going to collect. There are two ways that they do that. One is through a probate. Now, usually a person who is on Altex doesn't have anything. Maybe they have a house or a car, but they've otherwise spent down to $2,000. So it's not very common that the state will attempt to collect against a person on Altex unless they're after a house. If that person still has their name on a house, they may go after that through the probate process. So a lot of our planning, some of our legal tricks of the trade is to avoid probate. We'll take steps so that they can avoid probate and protect that house. In answer to your question, will the state take my house? Not while the person is alive, not if they're married, and not if we've taken steps to avoid probate. The second way that they may go against the person's or attempt to collect is to lien the house. And the only way they're going to do that is if a person is in skilled nursing for more than 3 months. That's an instance where we'll take steps to try to maybe get that person's name off the house legally. Sometimes there's not an option to get their name off the house. Let me just say this. I do not recommend that a person just give away their house. Bad idea. Without talking to an attorney first, don't do that. I hear that all the time, and a lot of times what we end up having to do is give the house back because that is going to cause a delay in that person's eligibility. So, and maybe I should mention that at this point is Altex has what's called a 5-year look-back period. And the classic one that I hear most often is that a person gave away their house to one of their adult children thinking that that's going to protect the house. And often what it does is it delays their coverage. So, for example, if I give away a $200,000 house to one of my adult children and then apply, within 5 years of giving it, that's going to be about 2 years that the state's not going to help me. Actually be over 2 years. It would be in about 2 years and 4 months that even though I'm completely impoverished, I've shot myself in the foot. So what I'm going to do in that situation is see what I can do to get that house back. That's how we have to fix that situation. So in general, it's a bad idea, but there are a few exceptions, and we, as attorneys, we'd love to sit down and talk to the families and see what we can do to protect that house. There's not always a perfect solution, but there are, I think, decent solutions that can protect it as much as possible.
So contact your friendly attorney, Charlotte Johnson, with any help before transferring your houses to the kids.
Yes.
Okay.
It happens way too often. Let's see. I probably also should get into, let me kind of give you a couple of examples that might make more sense, particularly for the married couple. So let's say that a married couple has a house and maybe $200,000 in savings. I'll just make that up. What the state is going to do is say, all right, we're going to cut that $200,000 because the house doesn't count. We're going to cut that $200,000 in half, 100, 100. The community spouse, she can keep her $100,000. The other half needs to be spent down to $2,000, under $2,000. In that scenario, the response from Altex is, come back when you have $102,000. Her $100,000 plus his $2,000. What they won't tell you is that they can save that $98,000 if they came and talked to someone like me. And maybe what we're doing is paying down that mortgage. Maybe we're looking at a Medicaid annuity that's saving all of that money. So that's just one scenario. And if I switch up the numbers a little bit, let's say that they have $30,000 in savings, they're going to keep $27,000, because remember, they can keep at least $25,000 plus his $2,000, so $27,000. In that scenario, I would say prepay the care facility 1 month and you're in.
Yeah.
So it's pretty simple. Maybe they have $400,000, and we have a married couple, $400,000. If one spouse is 80 years old and the other is, say, 55 years old, sometimes that happens, I'd be a little concerned about taking care of my spouse I'm leaving behind. What is she going to live off of? Because now I'm faced with this $6,500 a month bill. What's going to happen to her? And so in a situation like that, we split $400,000 in half. That's $200,000 and $200,000. But the most that the community spouse can keep is about $126,000. So there's more spend down in that case. But again, we still have the same options. Maybe paying down the mortgage, putting more of that into a Medicaid compliant annuity, and so forth. Again, we can help people provide for their spouse, and maybe there's an exception for a single person as well. So, with
respect to that dividing of the community property, you had mentioned. We'll go back to the $200,000 example. Mm-hmm. Does that dividing have to happen at the time of application, or could you go back and say, if they're working with you, or even not, say, in 2015 we had $200,000. Here's our bank statement. Here's our savings, and now 4 years later, if I said 15 or whatever the math works out to be, mm-hmm. now we have 102. I mean, can you forensically show that through statements, or do you have to meet with the state, the social worker, whoever looks at that, and says, okay, 200 in half, come back when you have 102?
Well, what they're going to do is they're going to go back to the month that person first started paying for care. So
that's the indicator.
That's the trigger.
Okay, trigger. Thank you.
That's the trigger and so that may be the scenario you described. That may be 4 years ago when they were first hospitalized, and from that point forward, they had caregivers or lived in a care facility. So
if someone walked in, say 4 years ago, my husband went into assisted living. We've been
mm-hmm.
paying $5,000 a month,
mm-hmm.
and at that time we had $200,000, and now we have, probably wouldn't work out with the numbers, but now we have 102, say.
Mm-hmm.
So
in that scenario, they're probably going to keep all of it.
Okay.
Now there's going to be a lot of legwork, because they have to account for 4 years worth of money. Yeah. So that's a lot of bank statements to provide to Altex. They will look at from that time
like
forward.
An audit, essentially.
It's
right?
an audit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, typically, other than that scenario, typically they don't audit. They're going from application forward, unless they feel like there's a reason that they need to look back. They can. They always can. Usually it's the married couples, that scenario you just described, where care was a while in the past and then they're going from that point forward. Or if a person sold a major asset, they're going to audit that to see where all that money went. So if I sold my home 2 years ago and moved into assisted living, they want to see where all that money went. So they'll audit that.
And they're looking to see that it's going to care and not to...
That I didn't just give it away.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So, yeah. But that's a question that I often hear is, are they going to audit me for 5 years because there's the 5-year look back? And I usually will say, no, not unless you think unless they think you're hiding something. They're not. Or you sold something. A house, typically, is what they're looking for.
Those are easy to find because they're recorded, right? I mean...
Yeah, but they don't always... Yes, and they will find them. If you don't tell them, they'll find it. And if that's a good way to burn your bridge, is if you don't tell them something and they run into it. So if you don't tell them that you sold a house, if you don't tell them that you put down a down payment on your adult child's house, if you don't tell them that and they run across it, you're in trouble. You're in hot water.
So put your assets in gold and silver in a safe and don't say anything.
Well...
That's not legal advice.
No. So anyway, I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. That's good.
Yeah. Well, let me describe just a few of the other myths that I'll often hear. And a lot of times it's from well-meaning individuals that just want to help. Family, friends, sometimes even Altex. So just a couple months ago, I was talking to a lady. She was in her 80s, taking care of her sister who's in her 70s in her home. Her sister's wheelchair bound. And we were talking about a different topic. We were talking about guardianship. And the sister mentioned that she's taking care of her all by herself. And I said, have you looked into Altex yet? She hadn't heard of it. So I gave her the phone number and told her how to apply. After she told me her sister's situation, she basically had very little income and no assets. So all she had to do was call them up and apply. It would have been a very simple situation. She called back 10 minutes later saying that she was denied because the income was too high. And I already knew that her income was well under the income limit. But the person who answered the phone at Altex had given them, it was $1,000 off of what the real number was. And I thought, how did you get his name? Because how many other people have they turned away? Because even Altex can be mistaken. And that's a real problem. Wow. Is that a lot of Altex applications, even for the wrong reasons, are denied. Most applications are denied. And that's our job, is to help people understand when they truly do qualify and what steps to take and help them through that process. What I did in that case is I just did a 3-way call, said the right words to Altex, and she got started. Now
did you the same guy, the same person? Or
no, it was a woman. She said that a man had answered the phone and a woman answered the phone for me. So It was a different situation. I don't know who that was, and unfortunately, but now it's not. I'm making it sound very simple that it's just a phone call. It's not. That's the beginning. Mm-hmm. But she couldn't even get past that phone call. So,
well, for someone coming into something new like that, she hadn't even heard of Altex. She doesn't know the lingo. I mean, what is Altex? Like, you explained it from the top of the conversation what it was, but people don't even know about it, and they won't know the lingo. They won't know like spending limits, assets, resources. They won't know just what to say, and if they don't know that, it's going to be hard to communicate with someone on the phone. Whether or not he may have made a mistake, but even if there was a mistake, sometimes there's just miscommunication because someone new to it just doesn't understand the terms that they use.
Right. So many people give up. Yeah. They've tried and it just sounds too overwhelming, and a person will just simply give up, and I don't know what happens to them. I think they just make do and beg and plead care providers to just take them for very little, saying that they've been denied, and that deprives two people, I think, the person receiving the care and the poor care provider thinking that this person is ineligible, which is too bad. A lot of these myths are depriving people. Now, our firm, we can do a free screening for them and help them know if there are any red flags that we hear. We'll listen for a lot of those eligibility red flags, such as the income, the medical eligibility, the financial eligibility. Do they have too many assets? Were there any transfers in the past? We'll screen those out and help them know if there are anything that can be done. I mean, because more often than not, we can fix problems, but they need to talk to us first before they apply.
Is that screening like an online form, or do they come and sit down with someone here in the firm? Or
it's generally a phone call.
Oh, so okay.
Right. So our staff will have a discussion with them, ask them a few questions, and as long as a person kind of knows the financial situation when they call, that person usually within a few minutes can let them know, well, you're eligible right now, like the lady I'd mentioned before who had nothing and her income was very low, and she described to me her medical needs, and I said, yeah, I'm fairly certain that person would qualify just in our discussion. And that's what it's like, is that screening will let them know. Or if a person just simply, a lot of people I meet with don't need that care yet, but they maybe recently had a diagnosis of dementia and they're concerned for the future. So we can talk to them about planning far in advance and how there are more options available early on to preserve their assets than when they wait until the money is gone. So either way, it's what I call advanced planning versus crisis planning. And crisis is when they need the care now. So different approaches. So some of the other myths I just wanted to mention briefly. We've already mentioned that Medicare covers long-term care, and that's not true. People find that out the hard way, I think. That All-Tex is only for a nursing home. And most people these days aren't in nursing homes. They're moving into assisted living, memory care, or have caregivers coming into their home. And All-Tex will cover all of that. And it could be if they reside in another state where that may be true. There are other states where the only thing that they cover is a nursing home. So you may have a person who's pretty high functioning living in a nursing home because they're out of money. But that's not the case here in this state. It doesn't have to be. So that's something that often will deprive people of the care that they need. Also, financially, we've already mentioned that a person may spend all that they have thinking that they have to be completely impoverished before they apply. There may be some exceptions that apply to them where we can preserve some of their money. We also want to continue to pay their care providers. So we hope they'll come to us before they're out of money so that they're not evicted or the care provider continues to be paid. And then there's also the exception, or the rumor that we already talked about, and that was, will All-Tex or the state take my home?
Oh, I jumped the gun.
No, that's fine. That's probably the number one question. I'm glad you brought that up. Is I hear that almost every day, and typically the question is, will they take my home? And the answer is no, not while you're alive. Not while you're married, not if you have a disabled child, and not if we can take steps to protect it. So no, they're not. However, I will say to that, if you're moving into a care facility and your house is empty, there's the practical issue of what are you going to do with that house? Who's going to pay for that house? The taxes, insurance, utilities. Yep. What's going to happen with it? If you keep that house and you're allowed to have a house, you probably won't have enough income available to cover those expenses, first of all. And that has nothing to do with the state telling you have to sell your house. It's just the situation. And then also, if you rent that house, it's not exempt anymore. It's a rental. It's more income, and it's no longer exempt. You're over your $2,000 limit. So it's a.
What about if you sell it? Does that still count as primary residence, your house exemption, or is it now part of the resource pool? Does that throw off your? As
part of the resource pool. Oh. So if you sold it, you got $200,000 out of it. You are $198,000 over the limit.
So if you were qualified at one point, now you're not.
No, you're not.
So you. Wow.
So there are options, though, that we should talk about if a person is concerned about protecting their house. Maybe we're planning far in advance, and there are things we can do to protect the house far in advance. Fewer options if they are at the crisis point.
Crisis, yeah.
So there are some things we can do to limit that exposure as much as possible. Those are the primary myths that I hear. Now, the other question that I hear quite a bit is, well, why should I hire an attorney to help us with this?
Attorneys are expensive.
They are. It depends. Again, it depends. There are also agencies out there that will assist a person with their All-Tex application. They are not attorneys. But the question is, are they giving legal advice or not? Can they provide more of a holistic picture of what that person needs? Because it's more than just money. Is that person receiving the care they need? Do they have people in place to do that? Are there family dynamics that we need to address? Is there something that needs to be addressed in court? And often there is. If a person needs to do some of that long-term care planning and their dementia is so far advanced that they cannot sign any of those legal documents, your powers of attorney and whatnot, we may have to go to court to put those in place. They need an income-only trust. We may have to go to court to put that in place if they don't have the capacity to do it themselves. And also, I think that our rates are not terribly different from those agencies that are doing it on their own.
Really?
No. So, really, I think they're getting a better deal overall from a person who can look at the whole picture and not just the financial eligibility, which is what those agencies are doing primarily. And an attorney owes their loyalty to that patient, that client, as opposed to the care facility who may be feeding in agency cases and so forth. Our loyalty is to that client because ethically we have to do everything we can to protect that person. So, I mean, there's just a few of the differences, I think. And we're also looking at that person's estate plan, and is part of this spend down that we're looking, if you want to cause real problems, then divert from their estate plan and do some gifting that involves just one of all of the other children. Then you're asking for problems. You really have to look at their estate plan and try to, as we're doing asset preservation and long-term care planning, keep that intact, especially if a person is vulnerable or has a dementia diagnosis or whatnot. It can get very hairy in that kind of situation. Anyway, that's really all I have to say, unless you have further questions for me.
We covered a few of the scenarios that could play out, and I'm sure there is a lot more that we haven't covered, and that's why I think it's a good idea and a nice service that you provide for the screening. And I would recommend that anyone who has any questions to call for your specific information. Of course, our conversation here is general, and everyone's circumstances and situations will be different and very specific to them. So is there a general number? What's the best way to get a hold of you or to get that screening? I
think the best is to call my number, and typically you dial for my assistant. And that number is 480-344-4033. I also have a website that's available. I have my website with the firm Davis Miles, but there's also a separate website that I've dedicated completely to all techs and special needs, and that is elderlawofaz.com. So that's www.elderlawofaz.com. And there's really no harm in just reaching out and contacting us, because there's no charge for that screening, and we'll let you know one way or another whether we think there's some way that we can assist any particular situation, whether it's asset preservation, helping a person get the care they need, maybe it's a guardianship, powers of attorney, trusts, or whatnot.
Charlotte Johnson of Davis Miles, thank you for your time today. It's been very informative, and I've learned a lot. I took a bunch of notes as we were talking, so I learned a lot. I know this will be valuable for anyone who listens. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much.